Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 6 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to the space sector in India, as ISRO faces a spate of resignations, whereas the private sector takes giant strides. As Vikram 1, India's first privately built orbital rocket, successfully placed multiple tech payloads into the low Earth orbit. The second article is related to cybersecurity, as there was a data breach at the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. In the mains value addition section, we'll have a discussion on the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. Additionally, we'll have a discussion on 4 articles in the prelims pointer section, which will be helpful for your prelims preparation. The first article is related to the space sector in India, as the private sector has taken giant strides in space. As Vikram 1, India's first privately built orbital rocket, successfully placed multiple tech payloads into the low Earth orbit. On the other hand, ISRO has been facing a spate of resignations in the recent past, which led to a circular from the Department of Space now. So we'll discuss the evolution of India's space journey, the challenges that the India's private sector faces in terms of the entry into the space sector, the shifts that the space sector has been experiencing globally, the reforms taken up by the government, the impact of the space sector reforms so far, and a few suggestions in this regard. This is important in GS3 under the topic Achievements of Indians in Science and Technology, Indigenization of Technology, and Development of New Technology. First, let us observe the current status. How far has India come in the space sector? We have launched more than 120 spacecraft missions ever since 1969, the establishment of ISRO. And since 1999 onwards itself, we have launched more than 400 satellites from 34 different countries. And now we have 4 active launch platforms. That is the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, the Geosynchronous Launch Vehicle Mark II, the Launch Vehicle Mark III, and also the Small Satellite Launch Vehicle. Now, India's space economy is about $8.4 billion, and that accounts for about 2% of the global share. And Skyroot Aerospace has become the first space startup, the private startup in India to successfully launch a rocket into the space. If we observe the trend of the space sector, it has been transforming. Earlier, it was focused upon the government-centric initiatives focused through ISRO. Now there has been an accommodation of the private sector also, especially after the Indian Space Policy 2023, which we will discuss in detail. And also India's space economy, we wish to grow by 5 times. From 2022, when it was $8.4 billion, we wish to grow it to about $44 billion by 2033. And the global space economy is also projected to become around $1.8 trillion by 2035. And therefore, more than 190 space startups have emerged from 2023 onwards because of the regulatory changes. From the prelims point of view, please also remember the names of various space agencies. For example, Roscosmos for Russia, CNES for France, European Space Agency for EU, CNSA for China, JAXA for Japan, and the Australian Space Agency for Australia. Now let us observe India's space journey so far. Firstly, it started with the initiatives of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, and he established INCOSPAR. It was established in 1962, and subsequently it evolved into ISRO, which was established in 1969. The vision of ISRO was to use space for the national development and not to participate in the race for becoming a superpower in space. Therefore, we launched our first satellite Aryabhatta in 1975. This was launched on a Soviet rocket, but it was designed and fabricated in India. Subsequently, the Satellite Launch Vehicle 3 rocket was developed under Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam and launched in 1980. And therefore, India became the 6th country in the world with indigenous satellite launch capabilities. And then Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, the PSLV, became our first successful flight in 1994, and it subsequently became our workhorse. Why workhorse? Because it accounts for more than 50% of the launches, and it has around 92% of the success rate. It has been cost effective also. Therefore, we utilized it for the Chandrayaan-1 first lunar probe and also for Aditya L1 for the first solar observatory as well. If we observe the successes in terms of our initiatives in the space sector so far, we have achieved the remote sensing capabilities by launching the remote sensing satellites, the INSAT, the satellites for agriculture, water, urban planning, etc. And for the communications as well, the ComSats for the telecom as well as broadcasting. Our technology has also evolved. For example, now we have expertise in the miniature satellites as well, the sensory improvements, the data processing, etc., which has had real world applications. For example, the applications in the crop yield prediction, the disaster management, and also the mapping of various natural resources in India. But India has always experienced the funding constraints. Because we were a developing country, we had the other priorities also. Therefore, we often encountered the dilemma whether we had to utilize the limited resources, the financial resources for the welfare activities or for investments in the research and development for taking up space activities. Therefore, we had to justify the space program investments against the poverty, healthcare investments, and the infrastructure developmental needs of India. Hence, we developed a frugal innovation culture. As we can observe that our budget for the Mars orbital mission, that was just about $74 million. That cost us less than the production cost of a Hollywood film, the Hollywood film Gravity. And simultaneously, there was the private sector participation also, but the private sector participation in the space sector was limited. It was limited to component manufacturing or the suppliers. They did not become independent operators parallel to ISRO. Now there has been a push towards the private ecosystem as well. Now let us have a brief overview regarding the space ecosystem in India. Let us cover the factual portions first before coming to the analytical part related to the challenges faced. In the public sphere, it is overseen by the Department of Space, and the nodal agency is the ISRO, whereas the nodal agency for the commercial activities is IN-SPACE, that is Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. Whereas in the private sphere, there are various component manufacturers which manufacture the components for the satellites. There are academic institutions and various space tech startups as well. If we observe the entire value chain of the space ecosystem, we can categorize it under three parts. The upstream segment, which comprises of satellite manufacturing, the satellite launch vehicles, and the midstream segment, which comprises of the satellite operations, and the downstream segment, which comprises of the applications, the application of the data which is got from the satellites. Now, ISRO is involved in all the three segments of the value chain for the space ecosystem. For example, there is Satish Dhawan Space Center, Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, there is a master control facility for managing the satellite operations, and there are application-oriented involvements also. For example, National Remote Sensing Center, National Atmospheric Research Laboratory, etc. Now, let us also have a brief idea regarding the field of expertise of various agencies involved. ISRO is the National Space Agency which is responsible for the planning and the execution of space missions, development of technology, and it also transfers the technology as well to the private ecosystem. The NSIL, the New Space India Limited, which focuses upon the scaling of the industry participation in the Indian space programs, and the major regulatory body for the participation of the private sector being the IN-SPACE, which promotes, authorizes, and monitors the private sector activities and ensures the compliance with the space-related norms and standards in India. The National Atmospheric Research Laboratory conducts the basic and applied research in the atmospheric and space sciences. The Physical Research Laboratory conducts the research in astronomy, astrophysics, space, and atmospheric sciences. And the Space Application Center, which is there in Ahmedabad, specializes in the designing of the payloads, developing of the applications for communication, meteorology, and the remote sensing satellite, etc. And the Human Space Flight Center develops and implements the technology needed for the human space flight, including the ambitious Gaganyaan project as well. From the prelims point of view, please also remember the locations of these agencies. For example, the National Remote Sensing Center in Hyderabad, the National Atmospheric Research Laboratory in the Tirupati, also the Space Application Center in Ahmedabad, and the ISRO headquarters in Bengaluru, etc. Now let us observe what are the current updates regarding the entry of the private sector in the space sector. The mission Agman makes India the third country in the world which attains the private orbital launch capacity through the Skyroot Aerospace. It has been developed by Skyroot Aerospace, and the Vikram 1 is the multi-stage orbital launch vehicle. It is having 3 solid stages and a liquid orbital adjustment module, and it is powered by in-house developed propulsion systems including 3D printed engines, and it is designed to carry small satellites weighing up to 350 kg to the low Earth orbit. Now it is not only the Skyroot Aerospace, you can also remember the names of a few other space startups which will be useful for writing as examples in the mains answer. For example, Pixel Space, which has expertise in the development of nano satellite constellation for hyperspectra imagery and data analysis, Dhruva Space for the development of small satellite platforms, Skyroot for the space launch vehicle design, Belatics Aerospace for developing of propulsion systems for the satellites, and the Agnikul Cosmos for 3D printing of the small lift launch vehicles, etc. Now let us do a simple SWOT analysis of the entry of the private sector into the space ecosystem in India. They will have various strengths and opportunities. For example, they will be able to come up with cost-effective innovations that we have already seen in India. For example, the frugal innovations being promoted through Mars orbital mission. We will be able to develop technology at lower cost and therefore fill the gap in the Indian space sector. Plus, they will be able to access India's large engineering talent pool, and there will be a strong focus on the satellites, especially the development of nano satellites, micro satellites, and there will be therefore lower cost for the development and the launching of the satellites, and there can be applications in the areas where India actually needs it. For example, applications in the defense sector, disaster management, surveillance, etc. Plus, the policy environment has been increasingly favorable, especially after the Indian Space Policy 2023. But there are certain weaknesses also. For example, most of the Indian companies, they operate at the tier 2, tier 3 levels rather than being independent operators. They are operating only in segments, for example, being component manufacturers, or there is demands for the products and systems for upcoming space missions where we have to rely upon the imports from the other countries. Various components are imported from the other countries. Therefore, there is a lack of sufficient domestic expertise in the manufacturing of electronic components and systems, and the demand for semiconductors, therefore it is met through imports only. Plus, there will be other threats also. For example, this sector is capital intensive, plus there is a long gestation period as well. The returns will be given after several years from the starting of the investment. Therefore, the preference is usually for the investment in the downstream sector, the application oriented investment where the returns will be quicker. Plus, there is a lack of diverse business models and the startup ecosystem is still in an early phase. Now let us observe what has been the shift in the space ecosystem globally. Globally, there has been a promotion of the entry of the private startups into the space ecosystem. For example, USA shifted towards the commercial partnerships from 1990s onwards, and that was done because of the policy itself favoring the entry of the private players. For example, NASA's COTS program from 2006 onwards, the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services program, encouraging the entry of the private players. Similarly, therefore, the SpaceX led to the first successful launch in 2008. In Europe also, similarly, the European Space Agency came up with the Technology Transfer Program, the TTP, in the 1990s onwards. And France and Luxembourg, they came up with dedicated space laws in 2000s and 2010s. The dedicated space laws to encourage the commercialization of the space sector. Even Russia restructured Roscosmos, although that led to mixed success and failures. China also led to the development of various private sector space startups. For example, Land Space, iSpace, especially after 2014, they were for the development of reusable launch vehicles. Therefore, globally, there has been various technological disruptions. For example, smaller, faster, cheaper satellites, 3D printing of engines, the component standardization, etc., and the development of reusable rocket technology, especially the advancements by SpaceX. Whereas the Indian private startups have faced various challenges. For example, Earlier there were ambiguities. The ambiguities regarding the rights and responsibilities, therefore it led to risk aversion in the investments. Therefore less investments flowed into the private startups in India in the space ecosystem. And the FDI rules, the foreign direct investments, they also were unreformed till then. And the technology transfer mechanisms, they were also restrictive. Now the technology transfer has been promoted from ISRO to the private startups also, and the access to the facilities, the government facilities, the testing infrastructure, that was also limited. There were no standard operating procedures put in place. Plus the sector itself was capital intensive and required long gestation. Therefore it led to the talent drain as well. People who wanted to invest, they rather explored the greener avenues in the foreign destinations. Plus there was international competition as well because of the global players in this sector. And India also wanted to ensure that it is not contributing to the environmental damage. Therefore we wanted to control the space debris, and the environmental challenges were also prioritized. Additionally, there have been certain challenges which were faced within ISRO as well. Of late, there has been a spate of resignations. Now, the Department of Space came up with a memo which tightened the exit rules, which restricted the resignations and also the leaving of the scientists through the voluntary retirement scheme as a matter of routine. Now it has been mandated that every request for the resignations as well as for the voluntary retirement, that will be routed to the Department of Space, which will be taking the final decisions. Because it is important for the implementation of Gaganyaan and the other important projects, the projects of national importance, and this measure is now reversing a 2020 delegation of powers. A delegation of powers which was done in 2020, whereby the ISRO center directors were allowed to independently approve the resignations and the voluntary retirements sought by the scientists. Why is it needed now? Because the highly specialized expertise, we cannot replace it immediately via new recruitments. Because the highly specialized scientists, they have the mission data, they have the expertise there. Why are they leaving ISRO? There are various arguments. For example, the private companies, they are offering better salaries, they are offering faster career progression and the opportunities to lead ambitious programs, and even the access to the stock options in the private sector. Therefore, there have been a spate of resignations. Now, what are the reforms that India has already taken up in the space sector? In 2023, we came up with a comprehensive space policy, which was a framework for the governance as well as for the commercialization in the space sector. Therefore, there were legal definitions which were given for the space activity for the terms like space object, orbital resource, non-government entity, etc. So that there is clarity. The vision of the policy was to develop capabilities, to promote the commercial ecosystem, to develop a leverage in the space for the socio-economic development, for the environment as well as security of India. For that, there was the promotion of advanced research and development, open procurement of space services, and ensuring a stable regulation. And therefore, the non-government entities, they were permitted for participation in the end-to-end activities. That is, the non-government entities, for example, the limited liability partnerships or the private enterprises, they were allowed to build satellites, manufacture satellites, launch satellites, utilize orbital resources, data dissemination, end-to-end activities were allowed by the non-government entities. Whereas the InSpace, that was the agency to function as the single window agency for authorizing all the space activity, for example, the launch, the management of the satellite operations as well as the usage of the data, and that was to publish the safety, security and liability guidelines, promote the development of industry clusters in the space sector, the technology transfer from the public sector to the private sector, and also ensure equitable infrastructure access. Infrastructure, for example, the testing facilities, the government testing facilities and infrastructure. And the data policy also ensured open access to the remote sensing data. That was to be given, the high resolution data was to be given free of cost to the government agencies, and for the private sector there was a transparent pricing policy. The NSIL, whereas handles the commercial deployment, and the Department of Space retained the policy formulation. Additionally, we also amended the FDI policy, the foreign direct investment, to align it with the space policy of 2023. Therefore, up to 74% FDI was allowed under the automatic route for satellite manufacturing and satellite operations, and 49% for launch vehicles and spaceports, and up to 100% for space components manufacturing in India. Now, what has been the impact of the space reforms taken up by the government so far? It led to explicit support for the private sector, for the non-government entities across the full value chain. For example, for the manufacturing, launch, operations, resource utilization, and even for asteroid mining, therefore data resources as well. Therefore, it reduces the entry barriers for the private sector players and therefore ensures an open market for the space services. This ensures transparency in the space ecosystem. Plus, equitable access is ensured to the ISRO infrastructure or ISRO data via the InSpace, which provides the authorization. The private startups therefore mushroomed in India. For example, you can give the examples further of DG Antara, which is going to develop the space surveillance satellite tracking capabilities for objects as small as 5 centimeters. The Bellatrix Aerospace, which is developing the propulsion systems and the satellite for the ultra low Earth orbit deployment. The Astrom, which is developing the satellite-based 5G connectivity solutions. Now, it also impacted the public sector. The public sector achievements after the reforms led to the Chandrayaan-3 lunar South Pole landing. In August 2023, India became the 4th country to do so. The Aditya L1 reached the solar observation destination in 2024. Then SpaceX space docking demonstration was given. Again, India became the 4th country to do so. And these capabilities will be important through the SpaceX mission for the crucial data, generation of crucial data, which will be helpful for the Gaganyaan mission as well. Additionally, the InSpace streamlined the authorizations and launched the satellite bus as a service, the SBUS, which again reduces the entry barriers for the private players. And the upcoming mission, the ISRO-JAXA LUPEX mission, will be used for the analyzing of the lunar water ice, which will be helpful for the future lunar explorations. And the ISRO adopted the Make in India chips. This again led to the development of entire value chain in India, therefore building supply chain resilience. The defense and the security were prioritized. For that, we will be launching 100 to 150 satellites in the next 3 years, focusing upon defense, disaster management, and surveillance in India. Therefore, the global companies, they have also been shifting the supply chains because of these reforms, and hence there is the focus upon the development manufacturing in the India itself for the satellite components as well. Now, what are the suggestions that we can provide regarding further reforms in the space sector? Primarily, we need to ensure that our strategy is aligned with our broader objectives. For example, the ISP objectives, the Indian Space Policy objectives, they need to be synchronized with our other objectives. For example, Digital India, Ayushman Bharat, Digital Mission, etc. And for that, we need to ensure that the satellite data that we are gaining, that has to be shared. For example, with the Smart Cities network. Plus, we need to bridge the research and commercialization. The development has to be shared. For that, the industry transfer mechanisms can be put in place. The industry transfer mechanisms can be put in place via building more intermediary structures. For example, technology transfer cells can be built, and the existing ISRO space technology cells, they can be expanded in the academic institutions so that the technology transfer gap can be bridged. Plus, the testing data and the validation infrastructure that can be shared with the private sector. For that, we can adopt a unified model for the accessing of the infrastructure across CSIR, ISRO, DRDO, and even the IITs also. And the industry access protocols can be put in place. For example, for the accessing of the public infrastructure, for the testing of the technology, for the validation of the technology by the private startups, for that there have to be clear fee structures, technical support, as well as geographical spread as well. And we can also conduct a survey and create a centralized database regarding the availability of various public infrastructure, the testing infrastructure which can be used by the private startups. The ISRO's POEM and the SMILE platforms can be used as the orbital test beds by the startups. Additionally, the government can be the anchor customer for whatever data the space tech startups produce. For example, through the National Geospatial Policy 2022, procurement targets can be given for the data to be procured from the startups, and this procurement can be done based upon the value-based models. And for that, we need to consider both the quality of the data that they are providing and the cost at which they are providing it. Accordingly, the payments can be given based upon the outcome that we are receiving. Plus, the startups, their priorities also has to be refocused, because most of the funding startups in India, they are having a focus on the upstream segment. They are focused upon the satellite manufacturing, satellite launch. Whereas globally, the commercial sector, the private sector is focused upon the downstream applications of the space related activities, as around 70% is accounting for the commercial space activities from the downstream segment. And in India also, we have various untapped potential areas. For example, the applications in the agriculture, disaster, resource monitoring, etc. Plus, additionally, we have been focusing more upon the space tech startups till now. We also need to engage with the large conglomerates. The Indian space policy that has been successful largely with the startups, but we also need to promote the collaboration from the conglomerates. We can learn from the defense sector for this. For example, in the defense sector, we promoted various joint ventures with the global entities, the JVs with the global entities by the Indian ecosystem. There can be the policy incentivization also for this, because we have already learned this in the past that we will be needing the private sector participation in the space. For example, in the Operation Sindoor, the availability of the satellite imagery, that was important for more situational awareness. Therefore, we need to promote the participation from the large conglomerates. Plus, we can learn from the global models also. For example, China has been focusing upon the dual use technologies that can be used in both civilian and military purposes. Why? Because it has a larger market. Therefore, the commercial space sector, about 40% of it is from the dual use technologies in China. Similarly, in the European Space Agency, the Artis 4.0 program, that is for the satellite communications, the government shares the risks. The risk is there in the development because it involves a huge investment, and in case there is a failure, it will cause huge losses also. But there the government is sharing the development risk. Development is done by the private sector startups. We can also have a strong legislative foundation also. We need a strong law, a comprehensive space activities bill, which will provide the legal certainty also, legal certainty for the investments, long-term investments, because the investments are needed for a long term because of a long gestation period. And this has been done by Luxembourg, Japan, UAE. They have comprehensive space laws. The market awareness and adoption is also needed, because the InSpace's space technology awareness workshops, they are collaborating further with the other enterprises. There needs to be deeper collaboration with CII and FICCI to ensure that there is market awareness and the adoption of the technologies which is being shared by the public sector. The InSpace's pre-incubation and entrepreneurship PI initiative needs to be expanded further. Plus, the early stage funding is insufficient. For example, the seed fund that is provided through InSpace, that is insufficient. That is just around 1 crore rupees per startup. Therefore, we need to expand through the technology adoption fund, which provides around 25 crore rupees for non-dilutive capital allocation for the validation of the technology. The technology which is ready for the adoption, which can be sent to the market. For that, we need to have more flexible evaluation criteria. Ultimately, we also need to quantify the space economy. What will be the benefits that we'll be gaining? For that, there can be a standardized framework that can be developed by InSpace. There has to be targeted policy interventions, and specific opportunities can be explored in the downstream segment by the private startups. There is a mains practice question also. India's space sector has undergone a significant transformation through policy reforms aimed at enhancing private sector participation, commercialization, and global competitiveness. Discuss the major challenges facing India's space sector, examine the space sector reforms introduced in the recent years, and suggest measures to strengthen India's position in the sector. Please try to write it. The next article is related to cyber security, as there has been a data breach at the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. Therefore, we'll discuss the basics of cyber security, the challenges that India faces with respect to cyber security, the institutional infrastructure in India for ensuring cyber security, and a few suggestions in this regard. This is important in GS3 under the topic Basics of Cyber Security. First, let us observe the challenges that India faces with respect to cyber security in India. They can be categorized under four broad headers. As per Joseph Nye, they can be in the form of cyber espionage. Espionage means intrusion to steal information, stealing information from computer systems. That is usually done on behalf of various adversaries, the adverse actors, for example, the various foreign players, etc., and the data is sold to them. They can also be in the form of cyber crimes, for example, various electronic frauds, phishing, identity theft, social engineering, etc. And there can be cyber attacks also. Cyber attacks are usually to interrupt the digital services or interrupt the digital systems. For example, sending a large number of requests by employing bots, etc., by bringing down therefore the website, leading to various denial of services, the DDoS attacks. There can be in the form of cyber war as well. Usually when there is a large-scale digital attack on the critical infrastructure, it is deemed to be a cyber warfare. Therefore, various cyber crimes are identity theft, phishing, etc., or they can be in the form of APTs also, advanced persistent threats, where the criminals or cyber criminals or hackers, they gain access, unauthorized access to the systems, and then they remain there undetected for a long period. That is why known as the advanced persistent threats. When you are writing an answer, you can also depict the increasing number of cyber attacks in India. Even if you don't remember the numbers, just draw a graph like this. Now let us discuss the challenges that India faces in ensuring cyber security. There has been a spate of cyber attacks, especially after COVID-19. For example, various ransomware attacks, even on defense units, and the data leaks of various government agencies, for example, the Indian Council for Medical Research, and the ransomware attacks that led to a huge loss in India. In 2020 itself, there was a loss of more than 1 lakh crore rupees. Plus, there is the vulnerability of the critical infrastructure also. For example, globally as well, there is hacking which is done for the hacking of the electronic systems which are attached to the warheads also. For example, in Russia-Ukraine war, the warheads were targeted. The electronic systems which are attached to the warheads, they were hacked. GPS jamming, GPS spoofing was done, therefore they were rendered inoperable. Similarly, in Iran, there was attack on the nuclear program in 2010 through the Stuxnet. In the European Union, there was an attack on the bank's infrastructure, server infrastructure, through the ransomware Pitya. There has been an underpreparedness which is there in India. Although the certain issues, the guidelines regarding the ensuring of cyber security, but there is under participation from the side of the private sector. Why? Because of the lack of the tools to ensure cyber security, plus the lack of the sufficient human resources, that is the expertise in ensuring cyber security. Plus there is limited participation of the private sector in terms of the research and development in the cyber security, as well developing of the tools to ensure cyber security. Plus now there is added complexity because of the recent technological developments, evolutions, for example artificial intelligence. Therefore the machine learning, data analytics, cloud computing, Internet of Things, and various legal issues, they contribute to additional layer of challenges in ensuring cyber security. Plus the 5G and the quantum computing, this has increased the potency of the malicious softwares as well. Plus there is financial vulnerability also. For example, if there is an attack on the SWIFT system that is used for the interbank transfers globally, the cross-border transfers also, it will cause a bringing down of the entire financial ecosystem globally. And the personal data that is also sold on the dark web after stealing the information. There are newer threats also, for example, digital arrests, where it is claimed that the person is placed under arrest and he is made to sit continuously there through video call, video conferencing, etc., and made to share their personal information, and that is used for siphoning of funds. Plus the risks due to the Internet of Things, for example, the various household equipments are also now connected to the internet. They can be hacked. Whatever is connected to the internet, that can be hacked by various cyber criminals. Now let us observe the institutional setup which ensures cyber security in India. At the apex, there is the National Security Council Secretariat. The National Security Council Secretariat is the apex agency which ensures cyber security, and under this functions the National Cyber Security Coordinator. The National Cyber Security Coordinator coordinates all the information related to cyber security got from all the agencies under all the departments. Then there is the National Information Board. It functions under the National Security Council Secretariat and it is headed by the National Security Advisor. And the National Information Board frames the policy regarding the information protection in India. The National Cyber Coordination Center functions under the National Information Board and it prepares the cybercrime prevention strategy, the investigation training related modules, the review of the outdated laws is done by it. The National Crisis Management Committee functions under the Cabinet Secretary, and the CERT functions as the agency which detects the cyber threats, monitors the cyberspace in India, coordinates the alerts, sends the alerts and warnings related to cyber threats. The National Critical Infrastructure and Information Protection Center functions under the NTRO, the National Technical Research Organization, and it was established in 2014. And then there is the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, again coordinating the cyber related threats. There are various other initiatives also, for example the Cyber Surakshit Bharat initiative and the Cyber Swachhta Kendra, ensuring that the botnets are cleaned, the botnet cleaning and malware analysis is done. The PMG E-Disha, which is for ensuring of the e-governance as well. There are various international initiatives as also, for example the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, India is not a party to it, the Global Center for Cyber Security and various UN conventions also. There is a need in India for the restructuring of the cyber security framework. Why? Because we have a fragmented cyber security ecosystem. All the ministries, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Defense and the National Technical Research Organization, they have their own cyber security units. Plus there are additional specialized units also for cyber security under CERT and also under the I4C, the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center. Rather, there has to be a unified agency, though there is no unified agency under which all the threats can be collated and the activities can be monitored. The laws related to cybersecurity, they also need an update as it is still regulated under the IT Act 2000 and the National Cybersecurity Policy 2013 and partly under the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023 as well now. Now, what are the suggestions that we can provide regarding the ensuring of cybersecurity in India? Firstly, there has to be a comprehensive statute which can ensure that there is the creation of a unified agency, therefore the collation of the information related to the cyber threats and the initiatives taken up to tackle them. There has to be a comprehensive national cyber security strategy also, and we need to develop offensive capabilities as well, not only defensive capabilities, because if we have the offensive capabilities, for example, if a foreign adversary goes for a cyber attack upon us, we also should have the capability to go for a counter attack on them. This will serve as a deterrence. For that, we also need to develop softwares to intercept attacks, and we also can go for air gapping, which is usually done for protecting the critical infrastructure. For example, the computers which are used for giving commands to the critical infrastructure, they are not connected to internet, rather the information is shared to them via offline inputs. And we can also explore more investments in the big data analytics, cloud computing capabilities and international cooperation in cybersecurity as well. Now coming to the article, there has been a leak from the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. The leaks including the engineering drawings, inspection records, minutes of meeting, technical reports, official correspondence, etc. It was detected after it was observed that it is circulating on the dark web and it was leaked by the ransomware group World Leaks. Now, the plant is operated by the NPCIL, the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. It has downplayed the leak and maintained that the documents, they are related only to the non-critical facilities outside the reactor island. Therefore, there is no risk to the nuclear safety. And this is not the first incident. In 2019 also there was a cyber incident related to this. It affected even the ISRO also. At that time the D-Track malware was linked to the North Korea backed Lazarus group, which is an umbrella name given to it for describing the hacking activities. And the same family of malware was linked to the 2016 cyber attack also on the Indian private bank ATM network also. It spread across the banking system at that time, forcing the replacement of millions of debit and credit cards. Now this is also targeting the domain controller of the online network, exposing the credentials such as the passwords. A domain controller usually functions as a central server that acts as the gatekeeper of a network and verifies the authenticity of the other devices which are connected on the network. Following the intrusion, now there has been suggestions from the expert groups that the attack was meant to steal information on India's thorium-based nuclear power, a technology that Indian scientists have been working on for decades. Now there is a mains practice question also. Discuss the major challenges India faces in ensuring cyber security. Evaluate the existing institutional architecture and strategy to tackle cyber threats and suggest measures to strengthen India's cyber resilience. Please try to write it. There have been similar questions asked by UPSC previously, for example in 2017 regarding the potential threats of cyber attacks and security framework to prevent it, and in 2020 also asking for different kinds of cyber crimes and the measures taken to fight the menace. In the mains value addition section, we'll have a discussion regarding the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. Under the Act, there are around 37 offences which are considered as offences against the persons belonging to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities, and these can be patterns or behaviors inflicting criminal offence and breaking the self-respect and self-esteem of the persons belonging to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities, and they can be in the form of denial of economic rights, democratic rights, social rights, discrimination against them, exploitation of SC/ST persons, and the abuse of the legal process. They will be treated as cognizable offence, therefore the complaint has to be registered, and under section 18 it is made even more stringent that no anticipatory bail is allowed under the cases registered under the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. And even under section 4 it is provided that the public servants who neglect the duties deliberately, they are also liable, and the special courts have to be established. The special courts will be established by the states in consultation with the Chief Justice of the High Court of that state. Now the Prevention of Atrocities Act underwent an amendment in 2015. In this, more instances of atrocities were added and they were to be treated as crimes against the persons belonging to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities, and special courts and special public prosecutors were to be appointed. And it also defined the willful negligence, that is the denial of registration of complaint that will amount to dereliction of duty, and the accused, if he is acquainted with the victim, he will be treated as if he is aware of the status of the caste or the occupation of the victim. But in the Kashinath Mahajan case, the Supreme Court observed that the advance bail can be given if there is no merit in a complaint, and even a preliminary inquiry can be done before the registration of FIR. Even regarding the arrest, safeguards were given. But in 2018, the Prevention of Atrocities Act was again amended and the Section 18A was inserted, effectively diluting the Supreme Court safeguards in the Kashinath Mahajan case. Subsequently, in Prithviraj Chauhan case in 2020, the court upheld the constitutional validity of Section 18A. Therefore, the pre-arrest bail, the anticipatory bail, therefore, it can be given only in extraordinary situations where there has been a miscarriage of justice, and hence the anticipatory bail, it will not be a matter of routine in the cases registered under the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. Rather, it will be given only in exceptional cases. The next article is related to the Tenkasi Settlement. This is important in the prelims under the topic History of India. The Tenkasi settlements were discovered on the banks of the Vaipar River in Tamil Nadu in the Tenkasi district. The site where the excavations were done is at the Malayadapatti near the Karivalam Vantharalur. There has been evidence earlier also regarding the settlements here. The earliest evidence was the finding of tiny microlithic stone tools from the region's earliest inhabitants. The later evidence included the expensive Sangam era brick structures, iron working evidence, craft production debris, etc. When we observe, it has been culturally slightly different from the northern Tamil Nadu. In the northern Tamil Nadu, a clear transition is observed. A clear transition from microlithic to neolithic and then to iron age. Whereas in Karivala Manathu bypasses the neolithic and the chalcolithic phases, and this is mirroring the discoveries at Mangudi, Sevagalai and Adichanallur. And it is not just inhabited, rather it was also functioning as a manufacturing and the production center, as is obvious from the discoveries in the excavations. The initial recognition was done more than a century ago, as the Roman coins were reported from the region. Therefore, surveys were conducted by the British. The early surveys were conducted by the Tirunelveli Deputy Collector L.A. Camimade, and in 1932-33 even the records, the Madras Museum annual report documented the finding of glass beads and the burial urns at the site. Now, what are the current findings? Now we have also found that hematite was used for iron extraction and the building of iron implements. Large quantities of glass beads have been found, shell bangles, terracotta beads, coral beads, and even a gold bead has been found. In terms of pottery also, there have been discoveries. For example, the graffiti marked pottery was found, black and red ware pottery, red slipped burial pot was found, and black painted lidded vessels as well as perforated bowls were found. The other artifacts which were discovered at the site include the terracotta figurines, hopscotch pieces, terracotta spindle whorls used for weaving, terracotta discs, and also rectangular gaming pieces and copper coins from the site. Additionally, regarding the burial patterns, there have been significant discoveries. For example, the red slipped burial pot was decorated with painted peacocks on the shoulder of the burial pot. The molar and premolar teeth were recovered outside the vessel. A black and red ware pot was placed beneath it and it served as the burial urn. Now, similar vessels were discovered at the other sites also at Hadappa, Hulas, Birrana, which depict peacocks with the human figurines enclosed within the bodies. Therefore, this was having a significance of a ritual. The Sangam literature, specifically Akananaru, refers to decorating memorial stones with peacock feathers, and it matches the discovery. The large brick structure was also found along with descending steps into it. Now, this is explaining either there was an underground granary there that was used to store grains, or that was used as a rainwater harvesting tank. And this is despite the fact that this is near the banks of the Vaipa river. The brick dimensions and the style of the bricks, they resemble the discoveries at Kiladi, Alankulam. Therefore, it also belongs to early historic or the Sangam period. And therefore, we can say that there was sophisticated water management there despite the proximity to the Vaipa river. Now, what is the significance of these discoveries? It shows that in the ancient society, also in the ancient Tamil society particularly, there was technological sophistication, there was artisanal excellence, and even economic vitality. And there has also been a remarkably continuous human occupation. There has been therefore no major geographical events which led to the wiping out of the population in between, and across thousands of years therefore there was continuous human occupation. Plus, this lied on the trade route also, because it was located on the ancient route linking the eastern and the western coast. Hence, the site served as combined habitation site and also the manufacturing and commerce site. And it is important from the Tamil Nadu archaeology perspective also, as it shows regional antiquity. The Kiladi pushed the Sangam era further back via the carbon dating, whereas Sivagalai yielded iron implements dating back to the 3345 BC as well. The next article is related to inflation. This is important in prelims under the topic economic and social development. Now, the inflation data in India is measured across three parameters: the CPI, the consumer price index, the WPI, the wholesale price index, and the PPI, the producer's price index. When we observe the recent data, there is a common theme across all the three parameters, that there has been a faster price rise in June as compared to May. And the drivers were two mainly: the higher food inflation and higher fuel inflation. Food inflation because of weak rains, This year will be a year of El Nino, there will be lesser rains, and fuel inflation because of the interruptions in the import of fuel. We import from West Asia, and the West Asian region, there has been a war situation. Now let us look at some data first related to CPI. This is important for the households. It has increased from 3.93% in May to 4.38%. The WPI inflation has also increased year on year from 9.68% to 9.87%. The output PPI inflation, that has also increased from 9.38% to 9.57%. The RBI target, although, is for the CPI, the headline CPI inflation, at 4%, and for the first time in the last 17 months, the CPI inflation has increased to more than 4% in the month of June. Now, when we observe the core inflation, that is the CPI excluding the food and fuel, that amounts to the core inflation, that has remained unchanged at 3.9%. Now, what is the rationale firstly for having another parameter, the core inflation? Because the food and fuel prices, they are volatile, and the households, their consumption in terms of the other parameters, they do not change drastically. Therefore, we track the core inflation also. The core inflation remains unchanged. Why? Because the economists say that the consumption is subdued. The consumption is relatively less, whereas the investment-led growth has been high. The trend, if we observe the past 6 months, it rose only 20 basis points from 3.7% in January. And there has been a narrow core inflation also, which is observed, that is excluding the gold and silver jewelry, that has edged up to 2.5%. Now, how did the core inflation fall from 2023 to 2026, despite India having a 7% plus, more than 7% GDP growth? The answer lies in the investment-driven growth. The last 4 fiscal years, the gross fixed capital formation growth has been more than the private consumption growth. That is, the productive capacity that grew at a pace faster than the consumption demand. Plus the discretionary demand, that also got subdued. For example, there has been a decline or a moderation in the vehicle sales. The auto loans are lesser, the credit card loans are lesser, the durable goods loans after the GST cuts of 2025, September 2025, they have been lesser. Plus there is another factor also, the China factor. The prices have been falling because the Chinese goods prices have fallen. Because of the prices falling there, therefore there has been a narrow core inflation. Why? Because the producer price index in China, that has been negative from 2022 to February 2026. Therefore, this deflation was imported by India from China. Why? Because we are importing goods from China. The goods imports from China, that is more than $130 billion per annum, and this is around 3.5% of India's GDP. Therefore, we imported deflation from China, and there were GST rate cuts also. The price reductions, they also explain the subdued core inflation. Now, what is the impact of this? Firstly, there has been an inflation in the food, therefore inflation in the dining out prices also, as it is part of the core that rose sharply since the West Asian war because of the rise in the fuel prices as well. Hence, the restaurants and cafes, there was an inflation from 2.73% in February to 6.94% in June, because the higher fuel prices, higher commercial LPG prices, they were passed on by the restaurant to the consumers. Although there was a mitigating factor also recently, there has been a cut in the cylinder prices now. The manufacturing sector, how did it respond? It absorbed the increased input prices, because there was already a weak demand, a subdued demand in the economy. Therefore, the manufacturing sector had to absorb the increase in the input prices because of the increase in the fuel prices. Therefore, the manufacturing output PPI, if we observe, it declined 0.3% in June from May. The manufacturing input PPI, there was an increase of 2.1%. Hence, the manufacturing sector is actually facing the margin pressures as the input prices are rising, but the output prices, the prices that they are charging from the consumers, they have remained stagnant because of the already subdued demand. Plus, therefore, the takeaway is that the consumption still needs to be supported by the monetary policy. Hence, there has been a broad price divergence from the February to June. We can observe that the all commodity WPI that rose 6.9%, but the CPI rose only 2.3%. Although the real inflation impact of the hike in the petrol and diesel prices that was done in the month of May, that will be seen for the next 12 months. The next article is related to the Bar Council of India. This is important in prelims under the topic Indian polity and governance. Before coming to the article, let us observe a few facts regarding the Bar Council of India. This is a statutory body. It regulates and represents the Indian bar, and it was framed under the Advocates Act 1961 on the recommendation of the All India Bar Committee. The objective of Bar Council of India is to safeguard the rights, interests and the privileges of the advocates. What are the functions of Bar Council of India? It prescribes the standards of professional conduct, the standards of etiquette that the advocates have to maintain. It has a disciplinary jurisdiction over the bar. It also prescribes the standards for the legal education, providing recognition to the universities which provide for the courses of law. It conducts the All India Bar Examination. After the passing of the All India Bar Examination, only the advocate can practice in any court of law in India. It also funds the welfare schemes for the advocates who belong to the economically weaker sections and physically handicapped advocates. It also recognizes on a reciprocal basis various foreign degrees, the foreign qualifications in law, to ensure that they can also practice law in India. Now, what does it comprise of? It has members elected from each state bar council. The members are elected for a period of 5 years, and the other members are Attorney General of India, Solicitor of India, and it has the power to choose its own chairman and vice chairman from among its members, and they serve for a period of 2 years. Now coming to the article, the Bar Council of India has issued comprehensive guidelines prescribing standards for usage of social media by advocates, law students and legal interns. It prohibits the advocates from creating or circulating social media content that sensationalizes the court proceedings, judicial hearings or the professional work, and it also directs the advocates to refrain from making reels, videos, photos or promotional content inside the court premises, bar rooms, the courtrooms, etc. in a manner which is inconsistent with the dignity and decorum of the profession. The circular also bars the lawyers from clipping or editing or circulating live stream proceedings with captions, music, commentary that ridicule, mock or distort the sensationalize the conduct of the judges, etc. The circular also prohibits the lawyers from circulating AI-generated images, deep fake videos, voice cloned recordings or other synthetic content as well. The next article is related to National Medical Commission. This is important in prelims under the topic Indian polity and governance. The National Medical Commission was constituted under the NMC Act of 2019. It replaced the earlier Medical Council of India, which regulated the medical education and the medical professionals. It provides the recognition of the medical qualifications, accreditation to the medical schools, registration to the medical practitioners. It also monitors the medical practice and assesses the medical infrastructure in India. It is headquartered at New Delhi. What are its functions? It frames the policies for quality, maintaining of standards in the medical education and also the regulation of the universities, medical schools. It frames the policies for regulating institutions and research work, assesses the requirements in the healthcare infrastructure, therefore gives the recommendations regarding the building of healthcare infrastructure and the human resources in India. It is also ensuring the compliance by the state medical councils, and it has an appellate jurisdiction with respect to the decisions of various autonomous boards, and it also prescribes for the codes for professional ethics in the medical profession. Now, what is its composition? It has 33 members including the chairman, and they are medical professionals only. 10 are ex officio and 22 are part-time. The board also has the Medical Advisory Council, whereby it is serving as a platform for the states to put forward their views and concerns before the National Medical Commission, and it advises the NMC on measures for minimum standards of medical education. There are 4 autonomous boards also: the UG Medical Education Board, PG Medical Education Board, Medical Assessment and Rating Board, and also the Ethics and Medical Registration Board. Now, this Medical Commission was replacing the earlier Medical Council of India, which had more than 100 members and which had a tenure of 5 years, whereby 70% were elected. But for the National Medical Commission, majority are nominated, and here the quorum of 13 members is required out of 25 members for it to take any decision. Now the NMC will no longer be processing the routine requests from the faculty members and the medical colleges who seek to determine the eligibility of the candidates for the appointment, promotion or designation to the teaching positions. Only the complicated cases will be referred to it by the institutions. Therefore, the responsibility will be shifted to the appointing authority, the medical institution, university or any other competent authority. The National Medical Commission will no longer issue the eligibility certificates or clarifications in the routine cases where the eligibility can be determined by using directly the provisions of the Medical Institutions Qualifications of Faculty Regulations 2025. Thank you.